Welcome back to the channel. This is Stuart Chalk again, the PI of the KnowLedger grant. And in this short video, we're going to just talk through what we mean in the project when we say the KnowLedger ecosystem. So the way in which the KnowLedger project is set up is we're fundamentally going to build a piece of software using Python and build it generically enough so that we can basically add to the interface any modules that are necessary to give researchers the kinds of functionality that they need to do their research. And so to do that, in addition to building the actual software, we have created an ecosystem which the community will be able to contribute to. And the ecosystem is built on GitHub and uses GitHub repositories as the mechanism to allow researchers from any community to get involved with specific aspects of the project. So on this slide, we have an image of what we think about as the KnowLedger ecosystem. In the center at the top is a GitHub repository where the KnowLedger software will be made available. And we're going to make it available initially as a Dockerized version. And the reason for this is twofold. One is when the software is therefore installed on anybody's computer, whether it be Windows, Mac OS, or even a Linux flavor, basically the environment where the software will run will be the same because it's Dockerized. This makes, obviously, standardization very much easier in a broad sense. In addition, we can imagine that if down the road a particular research group is really interested in using KnowLedger and decides that they want their own sort of specialized version of the software, as it's already in a Docker image, there's already a Docker script to create it, that may make it easier for those research groups to be able to create their own sort of version of the KnowLedger software with components that are specific to their research group and make those broadly available to all the members of the group. Now on the left and right hand side on this slide, octagons represent repositories on GitHub that are what we really think about as the ecosystem component of this work. One of the hardest things to think about in terms of getting community involvement in the project was how can we do that considering we're just creating a piece of software. And yes, we could obviously have a large number of people on the KnowLedger GitHub software repository, but that's not really very easy for users, for researchers to collaborate, contribute to the project if they don't know how to code. So what we decided was we could set up this ecosystem of a large number of GitHub repositories, each one of them focused on a particular aspect that needs to be defined, enabled, and contributed to by the community. So on the left-hand side, we have a set of orange octagons that represent GitHub repositories that will be only available to collaborators that we add to those repositories. So these ones will not be publicly open. But the reason for that is we need, obviously, a sort of a well-defined set of software collaborators and experts in data management to be able to create a robust piece of software that the research community can trust when they download it and use it. On the right-hand side are octagons that represent completely open GitHub repositories. And again, these are going to be focused more on aspects of how research is done and functionality that is necessary within the KnowLedger software so that we can basically have a large community of researchers take part in conversations and developments on those repositories and then use those repositories as the source for components that will be available in the interface in the KnowLedger system. So for instance, the top octagon on the right-hand side, which I've labeled KnowLedger module GitHub repository. The idea there is in order to be able to have different interface elements in the KnowLedger software, we probably need to have them as modules that can be added or removed as the researcher needs. And so that repository is going to be focused specifically on development of what are the criteria for generically representing a module, what are the metadata that are necessary to define a module for a particular function or activity, And then finally, once the specifications of what we need for a module are defined, then we can actually use the repository as a way to allow the research community to develop versions of modules that can then be made available in the KnowLedger software. In that way, what I mean is GitHub repository can be forked by anybody in the research community, and then they can develop, for instance, a module that they think is important for their particular research work. They can, once they've developed it, they can then submit it as a pull request back to the GitHub repository. And of course, those that are admitting the GitHub repository will then hopefully review it and then let it in as a contribution. And what we intend is that the KnowLedger software will be able to reach out to that repository to get a list of available modules that have been defined, make that list available to users when they start setting up their dashboard. And obviously, if a user picks it, then that module or the definition of that module for whatever particular activity it is will be integrated into the KnowLedger instance that the researcher is running. So in this way, we feel not just for modules, but for metadata templates of metadata you might capture for research experiments, workflows, how you might potentially add additional functionality to the software to add things that are more relevant to education, and many, many other topics that we have ideas for can be sort of aggregated from the community because they can be part of any of the repositories that we have in the ecosystem and contribute what they feel they can to each and every one of those. So we hope that this setup really enables broad community participation in this project. So just briefly, this slide shows some of the ideas that we have for the different community-based KnowLedger GitHub repositories. And as I mentioned, we're looking at lots of different aspects of how the system can be set up. So on this slide, you can see GitHub repositories for each of the bullet points that have no as in the little tag title. And so we're looking at how do we define user profiles? How can we define data governance relative to data that is captured within the KnowLedger system? And again, when I say that, I mean it would be captured locally within the instance that a researcher is running on their computer. Further down the road, yes, there will be obviously a need to think more broadly about aggregation of data or data available to multiple users of the KnowLedger system, but that's not an initial focus of the project. So other things you can see on here are enabling collaboration, obviously very important in certain situations, but again, we also need to bear in mind in that context about how can we make sure that users of the KnowLedger system can be confident that they're in charge of the data that they have, and it's only available to those people that they make it specifically available to, and with a certain level of access, which again needs to be defined. As you can tell, the idea here is we all have the base software, but I'm hoping that the research community can help us define how it runs, and it gives a sense of trust in the product that researchers really need to kind of go all in on using something where this may be initially a project where they're testing it out and it's sort of a distraction from their research because they do their research data management other ways, but they want to see if this is a functionality that they could really move over to. And so this is the mechanism using the GitHub repository ecosystem that we think is going to be a very, hopefully, useful way to make sure that anybody in the research community can contribute to the project. Just to wrap up, all of the ecosystem GitHub repositories that I've been talking about will be on this GitHub organization site. So we have the KnowLedger RDM organization available, and I've already put up, in template terms, I've put up 3 of the repositories that I've been talking about. So in the next month or so, we will add all of the other repositories that we think initially should be available. And obviously, we'll be sending out more information when they go online. So thanks for watching, and hopefully watch more videos on the channel coming up.